Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is Ann Radolinski with Frederickson and Byron. I am delighted to be with you this afternoon. Just a few housekeeping things before we get into the presentation. For questions during the presentation, please hover over the bottom of the screen and you'll see the chat feature. And should the audio cut out during the presentation, please use the dial-in number provided, and we will take care of that for you. So again, good afternoon, and welcome to everyone. I am delighted to be with you today, even if remotely, to discuss a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of businesses, attorneys, and employees alike. Our topic today is sexual harassment. What in the world should we be doing? How should we be reacting in the current environment? What is an employer to do? Are there proactive measures that can be taken to control risk in this new environment? It is an extremely hot topic, to say the least, for all of us. I will provide first an overview of some key themes in this area. I have distilled down the deluge of information into a number of key practical themes and messages that I believe will be of most help to businesses and organizations that are seeking to respond in a measured and intelligent manner to the recent events, the events of the last year. I will cover only very briefly and only for context some of the legal standards of sexual harassment. The legal standards have actually not fundamentally changed, at least on the federal level. Although there are movements afoot, particularly at the state level and throughout the country, to expand the definition of sexual harassment, and we are monitoring those. What has changed, however, and what we can expect to continue to change are the reactions and interpretations of agencies, judges, and juries to cases that are brought before them, as there has been a decided shift in public opinion on this subject. We cannot deny it. I will then talk about the current environment, what it means for businesses and organizations, and my thoughts regarding how best to respond in the current environment. You're receiving during this session the benefits of thoughts as your counsel, if Frederickson and Byron is your counsel, the benefits of the thoughts of our department on these issues. We've spent a considerable amount of time, and I have in particular, considering the best way to protect our clients and advise them as they seek our advice in this area. What I am going to propose in this session may not in its entirely work perfectly well for your organization. What my hope is that there will be tidbits of food for thought that you can garner from my comments today, that you can then use in developing your own risk management programs or processes, or that you can use in discussions with managers and employees on the various topics going forward. So let's move to our agenda. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the current environment, a bit of an overview of the statutory protections, and then move in for the remainder of the presentation into what does this mean for employers. What are our key themes in this new environment? There has been a veritable sea change. Public opinion has clearly demonstrated now an intolerance for inappropriate behavior and the perceived failure of industries, companies, organizations, boards, and executives to effectively address and stop the behavior. What is emerging is an expectation, actually, of standards for courtesy, respect, and professionalism in the workplace that go well beyond the mere prevention of unlawful sexual harassment. And I'll talk about this more as we go forward this afternoon. In light of this sea change, we are suggesting to clients, companies, and organizations that they evaluate to the extent they can their current prevention programs, and consider revamping those programs with a goal towards broadening the message and broadening the engagement, particularly with respect to management level employees. And you'll hear this in my comments again and again in our time today, that the focus is not so much on sexual harassment prevention. That has not been effective. Training programs have not been as effective as we would have liked. The focus we are proposing should be on leadership training. It is the management of the organization, to include its executives, managers, supervisors, and anyone else in a leadership or supervisory role that has the power to control risk and also has the power to create risk, hence the focus on leadership. Most companies would articulate that they wish to have a productive, efficient, respectful environment that allows business goals to be met and exceeded and limits effectively corporate risk. In order to achieve this in the current environment, it's a bit more complicated. I would suggest that in whatever program you put together, managers need to understand in a very real sense that they are the face of the business. They need to understand what this means in concrete terms, that they actually create the message for the business through their own actions and inactions and their own behavior and their lack of behavior, that they in practical terms are the role models for employees. The management creates the work environment in all of their day-to-day formal and informal interactions. The work environment is not created or defined in a written policy or a mission statement or a corporate code of conduct, although those are important documents for reference. Managers need to understand that they are charged with creating the expected work environment that you are giving them the responsibility to create, and that they must be actively involved in reacting to situations in that work environment that do not meet the standards, that are not respectful and professional, whether or not that behavior or that conflict rises to the level of unlawful sexual harassment. The failure to do so, unfortunately, in the current environment will have not only significant business and professional consequences, but personal consequences for managers, as we have already seen in the media. Again, I understand that in making the recommendations and suggestions today that it may not be feasible as a practical matter to take all the suggested measures, but I'm hoping that the discussion will provide some food for thought if you are in a position now or in the future to evaluate your own programs or to institute a prevention program, or even if you're in a position to formulate partial topics for discussions in management meetings. Let's go to our agenda. Let's touch base very, very briefly on the law of sexual harassment. The law has not changed in a fundamental way on the federal level. What has changed is that, actually what has changed and what we expect to continue to change is that public opinion has and will affect judges and juries. We believe that public opinion will affect the way they view cases that come before them, and we believe that public opinion is going to affect the kinds of reactions that jurors will have to sexual harassment cases and other harassment cases. We expect that there will be fewer cases that attorneys have the ability from the defense side to dismiss out early on in the case. What also is happening is that it has affected the kinds of cases that plaintiffs' attorneys are taking, and it has affected the kinds of internal complaints. We're seeing a lot of that in our practice that individuals are bringing. And we'll talk about that as we move forward this morning. So as we all know, federal and state law have broad protections against discrimination and harassment. The various protected classes, depending on the state you're in the 5-state area, are set forth on the screen. We are all familiar that there are two basic forms of illegal harassment. One, quid pro quo, is essentially a situation where an individual is expected to accept sexual advances or a relationship or perform sexual favors to keep their job or to gain a promotion, for instance. We used to say that these types of cases, these quid pro quo cases, were infrequent, but as we see in the recent events over the last year in the media and in the cases percolating up in the courts, these cases are alive and well. The other type of case we're also very familiar with, type of harassment, the hostile work environment harassment. It has a very complicated legal definition, but it essentially is a situation where events and behaviors in the workplace, when combined, rise to the level of unlawful harassment. There are many, many examples of problematic behavior in this area. A few of them are on the screen. We see, of course, more and more in our digital age, sexual harassment and other harassment cases having some kind of a presence in YouTube videos, social media interactions, text messages. We see a lot of digital components to our cases now. What is the employer's legal obligation? The employer's legal obligation in this area is actually, if you put it in layperson's terms, to monitor their work environment, to ensure that the behavior in the work environment is respectful. And where an employer's legal obligation kicks in, meaning liability, is when they knew or should have known of the problematic behavior and they didn't investigate and take timely and appropriate action. There is also potential under federal law and under some state law, depending on the state you're in, for automatic liability. Even if the employer, someone with responsibility for investigating these claims is not actually on notice of the behavior. This is in instances where the harasser is a direct supervisor. Again, there's some very complicated legal standards involved in that, but in essence, if the harasser is a direct supervisor, the company could be automatically liable for that behavior under federal and state law, even if a complaint wasn't made and they weren't made aware of it and given an opportunity to correct it. How are employers put on notice? The focus in this area, as I mentioned, is monitoring. Employers, those in leadership, those in human resources, any supervisor, manager is charged with monitoring the work environment. So how is a company put on notice? They're put on notice whenever anyone in leadership, anybody, a supervisory person, receives an oral complaint, a written complaint, when they witness potential inappropriate behavior, or even where they have secondhand notice that there may be a potential concern. Again, the legal standards are much more complicated than what is indicated on the screen. I am just giving these comments for brief context for us. We all know as the law has developed that anyone can sexually harass anyone else. A woman can sexually harass a woman, a man can sexually harass a man. It is not just the more common example would be a man sexually harassing a woman, but we see all types of harassment come across our desks. Another very key component to the legal framework in this area is the potential for retaliation claims. In virtually every human rights statute, in virtually every employment statute, and certainly in the federal human rights statutes that prohibit harassment, even if a person is not able to prove that they were subjected to unlawful harassment, if they are retaliated against for having complained about harassment or having participated in an investigation in good faith, they can receive all the same damages that they could if they were able to prove unlawful harassment. The areas of concern with retaliation include an individual complains and then shortly thereafter in time, they're either terminated or demoted, or they receive a poor performance review, or they're denied a work opportunity, or they're shunned in some way in the workplace or targeted with bad behavior. So it's a very key concern in terms of monitoring, employers monitoring their work environment, to monitor equally for examples and behavior that might be retaliatory. So what is this new environment that we have? The events of the last months, really the last year, have actually been surreal. They really have been for me. I did not expect what the media explosion that came to fruition last fall. It has seemed as if we've all been living in reality TV. The stories that have emerged are too numerous to count at this point. The media expose began with Hollywood, and we all gasped, at least I did. It has since touched almost every aspect of our society, affecting and sadly, in some instances not so sadly, but in some instances sadly, destroying the reputations of TV personalities, CEOs, coaches, writers, performers, judges, physicians, U.S. gymnastics, and regular people. And the circle appears to be broadening on a monthly, if not weekly basis. Virtually every week in the media, in the social media, in the traditional media, you see examples of this new environment. The impact has already been significant legally and practically speaking. The Me Too movement, hashtag Me Too, has become a household word. Who would have thought? The explosion of the discussion has crossed generations and cultures here in the U.S., and what happened here in the U.S. has had an impact internationally, as we have seen. It has definitely affected public opinion, and this means that it has affected employee attitudes and tolerances for workplace behavior and perceived unfairness. It has affected politicians, it has affected judges, it has affected absolutely every aspect of our society. We are in a state of change, and the ground has shifted and is shifting. So Americans love their polls. What are the polls saying? The polls that I am going to run through are from respected sources. You know, there's all sorts of information out on social media, and you sometimes wonder, you know, what to rely on and what not to rely on. But these are all from respected polling sources. So in 2011, in a Washington Post ABC News poll, 47% of those responding said that sexual harassment was a serious problem. You see that in 2018, it has jumped to 72% who view sexual harassment as a serious problem, and 82% view it as a problem. 1/3 of women reported experiencing unwanted sexual advances in the workplace, and 41% of those under 40 reported experiencing that. That surprised even me as a defense counsel. This is somewhat startling. This is the Pew Research Center reporting in December of 2017 that 66% of the American adults responding to the survey said that recent developments reflect widespread problems in society. The polls, what has happened has also affected us, our politicians and our views of politicians, but I'm going to move on because I do not care to talk about politics. In 2018, the Pew Research Center reported that 46% of women, 46% of those responding believe that women not being believed was a major problem. And 50% of those responding said that harassers getting away with sexual harassment was a major problem. Just interesting pollings to sort of get a sense of where our country is. This was very interesting. This is the Pew Research Center again, said that 67% of those responding said that women making false claims was either a minor problem or not a problem. It's kind of interesting. And this one, I think, has some very practical and immediate messages to all of us as employers. 61%, this is a 2018 poll, 61% of those responding said that the increased focus on sexual harassment makes it harder for men to know how to interact with women in the workplace. This I gave a good deal of thought to because of the implications for the workplace. I think that it's a message to all of us as employers to watch for signs of this and to consider appropriate constructive steps to address this with both men and women. And, you know, my thought would be out of this, what I would take from this is that as part of a prevention program, maybe we have to start coaching people on practical ways to interact with each other and practical ways to avoid, interactions that may come back to harm us in some way. I was giving some decided thought to this, and I thought, you know, just to give an example of this, maybe employers need to include as part of their prevention program a decided and practical discussion about behavior outside of work, meaning when you are, just to pick one aspect of this, when you are out with, particularly as a manager, out with coworkers, those who report to you, other managers, or when you're traveling for business. What are the rules? What are the things that you should avoid? Some clear examples would be telling employees that, particularly management, executives, people in leadership roles, supervisors, that you need to know when to call it a night. So you go out with folks that report to you, other managers, etc., and it's getting to be 10 or 11 at night, and maybe folks have had a couple drinks or two. Usually people's judgment, I'm sort of making a joke here, but I think it's true, but usually people's judgment goes down exponentially as the night grows longer. So call it a night if you're a manager or supervisor. Watch what you're drinking. Have only one drink or two drinks when you're out with coworkers. Avoid very personal discussions. They can be very, you never know when someone is going to misinterpret what you're saying or view what you are talking about as an invasion of their privacy. And when you go out with coworkers and those that report to you, include everyone. Avoid situations where you're having a late night dinner with one other employee, if the circumstances allow it. And then my favorite, don't ever have meetings in a hotel room. There are so many situations over the years that have come across my desk that involved meetings in hotel rooms that went badly. So in this new environment, the issue of inappropriate behavior has entered the public psyche. It's going to continue, we expect, for some time, the discussion. The media coverage, I used to say, will eventually die down, but I now am going to remove that from my PowerPoint because I do not think it's going to die down. The ground has already shifted. There is, in this new environment, a heightened awareness and heightened sensitivity to legal rights, yes, but legal thresholds are not a barrier for folks. Folks are looking, and we are seeing it in the kinds of calls we're getting from clients. Employees are more apt to point out unfairness or perceived unfairness or just rude behavior in the workplace. The sensitivity and awareness extends beyond traditional harassment, well beyond to abusive behavior, bullying. It extends, the sensitivity and awareness extends to perceived unfairness in advancement, in work opportunities, in compensation, in pay equity. We are just seeing a lot of internal discourse when folks see unfairness, and folks are much more likely to bring that to the attention of their supervisor or others in positions of power. We are also, of course, seeing a decided scrutiny of behavior and actions, scrutiny of boards, scrutiny of executives, management, supervisors, and folks in positions of power. I also hear from clients that they are getting inquiries from customers, shareholders, and investors about what they're doing in this area in terms of prevention and promoting productive and positive leadership. As I mentioned, we are seeing an increase, at least anecdotally, in internal complaints. We're also seeing more instances where employees are seeking legal advice earlier in the process and seeking legal advice in situations where they might not have in the past. We're also seeing that plaintiffs' attorneys are taking cases that I don't think they would have taken 5 years ago. You're getting, basically the collective knowledge of our department here at Frederickson and Byron. We are seeing plaintiffs' attorneys pushing and taking cases that we really don't think they would have taken some years ago. The settlement demands are rising, and the negotiations are becoming more complicated. And there are some very large resolutions of agency charges and litigation matters that are emerging throughout the country. At the back of my PowerPoint, you'll see examples of those. I've provided those for your general information at a later time. I'm not going to actually go through them. But I've just given you examples of just settlements and resolutions in the last several years. So what are we to do with this new environment? How are employers to navigate legal risk in this new environment? I invite you to listen for just several minutes to a short presentation by Judge Laura Espinoza. She is the Fair Food Standard Council Executive President and a former New York State Supreme Court Justice. And she is making, this is a small part of a presentation that she made to the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues on behalf of the Fair Food Program. What is interesting about her presentation is that she discusses one industry's approach to creating concrete standards and to actually creating, setting up market consequences to bad behavior. The program, at least according to Judge Espinoza, that they have set up has effectively eliminated sexual harassment and abuse of farm workers in the Fair Food Program. So I thought it was an interesting presentation relevant to our topic.
Judge Espinoza, 4 minutes for your testimony, please.
Yes.
And we understand it does go fast. We know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to address the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues on behalf of the Fair Food Program. Over 500,000 women work on farms in our country, growing and harvesting the food we eat. The overwhelming majority of them, up to 80%, have and continue to suffer pervasive sexual harassment and/or sexual violence in the workplace. Since 2011, however, through the Fair Food Program, this grim reality is being transformed. In 7 states, from Florida to New Jersey, impacting 35,000 agricultural workers, the Fair Food Program has brought an end to impunity for sexual violence and other forms of sexual harassment on participating farms. Cases of sexual harassment by supervisors with physical contact of any kind have been virtually eliminated, and workers consistently report dramatic reduction in all forms of harassment. How did this new day come about? The answer lies in innovative, legally binding agreements achieved by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, a human rights organization that is also the recipient of a presidential medal for its work against modern-day slavery. Excluded from many legislative protections and facing weak enforcement of those that do exist, coalition members, supported by consumers of conscience, went to the top of the food supply chain for the market power needed to transform their workplaces. As a result, 14 major supermarkets, fast food chains, and food service companies have committed to purchase only from growers that implement a code of conduct with zero-tolerance provisions for sexual assault, forced labor, and child labor, and a range of other protections, including the right to work free of sexual harassment and to raise complaints without retaliation. Compelled by that purchasing power, participating growers have committed to implement the code. The program works because its standards were generated by workers themselves, the true experts on human rights abuse in their workplace. It works because education on their rights is extensive and ongoing. And it works because informed workers are free to access the program's monitoring organization. Through comprehensive audits and a 24/7 complaint line, the Fair Food Standards Council ensures that violations are addressed in record time and free of retaliation. But most importantly, it works because of prompt and effective market consequences for noncompliance. Faced with a choice between retaining supervisors who commit sexual harassment or selling to some of the world's largest food retailers, participating growers have always made the right decision. In the Fair Food Program, the right moral choice is also the right business decision. And everyone benefits. Participating growers have become employers of choice, and buyers eliminate supply chain risk. Now, workers in sectors as diverse as dairy in Vermont, janitorial work in California, we were with the promotoras a couple of weeks ago, poultry in Arkansas, and models in the fashion industry are adapting the Fair Food Program's elements to their own circumstances.
We found this presentation, a piece of it, very fascinating in terms of one industry's approach to moving well beyond traditional sexual harassment training sessions to the development of an actual program with market consequences, developing a living code that becomes the message of the organization, and the development of an organizational-wide culture to which everyone subscribes and everyone is required to subscribe. So there's some pieces of this that I find interesting in terms of parallels for private employers. So what are some of the messages that we take from this new environment? What can, and more importantly, what can employers do to move forward in a positive and constructive manner to limit a legal risk? Well, one point that we start with is the question, is traditional sexual harassment really effective? Is it enough in this current environment? Sexual harassment training has historically focused on legal definitions and the high thresholds for establishing unlawful sexual harassment. The training is often quite formulaic and either is a one-time training or once every several years. Sexual harassment training is indeed a component to an overall program, but in the current legal environment, it does not really help, in our view, that much with managing legal risk. Programs need to go beyond, in our view, focusing on the definitions, the legal definitions of harassment and unlawful behavior. They need to go beyond a policy review. Policies in this area are extremely important, and well-written policies are extremely important. But their importance really comes into play when you're defending cases in litigation, at least from a legal perspective. We find that employees often don't read or take to heart what's in the policies. It basically goes over their head, or not really over their head. It goes in one ear and out the other. Traditional training methods are well-intentioned, but they haven't been particularly effective in preventing or influencing behavior in any significant way. And we see this in the media. The reason for this is that folks are not inclined to view their own behavior as problematic. It's human nature for all of us to think that we are okay, that our own behavior, whatever it may be, is well-intentioned and simply okay, and no one's likely to take offense to anything I do. A cookie-cutter approach we're finding can be to risk programs and training programs can be problematic in terms of managing risk. We are inclined to advise our clients to consider developing a prevention program, a risk management program designed to your particular work environment. Our suggestion is that employers develop a program that promotes the particular kind of work environment that they wish to see, the particular type of leadership they're seeking, and the level of professionalism and respectful behavior that they wish to see in that environment. We are also suggesting that this should be an ongoing program with multiple touch points and discussion points, not a 2-hour training that happens once a year. Ideally, this would be an ongoing program and discussion, particularly with management and leadership, and then separately with the employees at large in management meetings, employee meetings, et cetera. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. The thought is that an employer would first gather the relevant information to gather their current state of affairs in the company, to evaluate where the organization is and where the leadership would like it to be. My thought would be bring the right people, the key people, into the discussion to shape the goals, to evaluate the current state of affairs, and include them in the whole process of promoting and rolling out the program to management and employees at large. It is critical to involve in the discussion senior management in both the preparation of the content of the program and the message of the program. And this is a critical component for any number of reasons. First and foremost, senior management understand the business. They understand what's critical to the business success, and they understand what type of leadership is needed to achieve that success. Also, in the end, a program or process simply will not be effective unless senior management has buy-in, helps create the goals and the message, and is committed to modeling whatever the desired leadership is in his or her day-to-day interactions with peers, with managers, with supervisors, and the employees at large, and with clients and customers. The other thing to consider is that the program and the strategy should be different for management as opposed to the employees at large. And this is precisely because it is management, it's executives, managers, and others in positions of power that actually create the work environment. They are the face of the organization, and they have the real power to promote an environment of professionalism and respect, or the flip side, to choose a different approach. They, in very practical terms, have the power to minimize or create legal risk. At the planning stage of such a program, what we would suggest is, again, you have the right people in the room or right people involved in the discussion, senior management, HR, and others that you bring in, and you look at your risk points. What are the risk points in your organization? Where are your problem areas? Where are there pockets within the company with particular challenges? Are there leaders that are less strong than others? And in the context of this discussion and discussing where you are, you would take a look, of course, at your policies, at your code of conduct. What is the message? Do these need to be updated? What is the kind of leadership we are looking for in our organization? You would review the organization's structure for receiving and investigating and acting upon complaints and concerns, not just complaints and concerns about sexual harassment, but complaints and concerns about anything to do with the work environment and the business. How have they been handled in the past? What has been the results? Has the action taken been effective or not effective? How good are our records? Was there fairness in the process? The manner in which an organization receives, encourages, and acts upon concerns and complaints brought by anyone in the organization goes a long way to actually promoting the corporate culture you desire. So if you promote fairness and openness in the complaint and investigation process and a dialogue, you are furthering your corporate mission and furthering your the goals that you set in this program. In terms of the rollout of the program, what we would suggest is that it involve many, many touch points, particularly with leadership and management, not just a once-a-year focus on, some aspect of behavior. Utilize management meetings, a portion of a management meeting to cover a topic about corporate culture, about the corporate code of conduct. Give examples, have discussion points, involve the managers in the discussion of how to address difficult or challenging situations. Consider special focus meetings for new leaders. This is a particular risk point for most organizations. A person who has amazing operational skills and business knowledge is moved into higher and higher leadership positions, but doesn't really have the tools for being an effective leader to their team members and to the folks around them. Utilize performance reviews with management and leadership and meetings with them as an opportunity to promote the message and have reward and consequences for individuals demonstrating the kind of leadership that you wish to see in your organization, and the kind of leadership that you would prefer not to see in your organization. You will see in my comments that the discussion we would suggest is much, much broader than sexual harassment prevention. It really focuses on leadership and promoting effective leadership and the corporate mission, the corporate code of conduct. Describing to your managers in concrete terms what is expected of them, and the potential consequences for not meeting those expectations. Consider broadening the discussion with managers in team meetings, management meetings, one-on-one conversations, to methods for defining behavior and performance standards for the folks that report to them, for themselves, but also for the folks that report to them. Give them tools and have discussion points about relaying performance and behavioral expectations to their teams. Give them coaching about how to discuss inappropriate behavior, disrespectful behavior, and to promote positive interactions among team members. So you really are talking about leadership development, and we really believe that this, in the end, is the best possible way forward in terms of a risk management program. Consider broadening the discussion to provide tools for management to address accidents waiting to happen in their team and in the areas of business in which they have responsibility. Years ago, Mayor Giuliani in New York City instituted what was called by some a broken windows program. The notion was that bad behavior, small crimes such as jumping the turnstile at in the subway, these small bad behavior, small crimes, if left unchecked, would lead to bigger problems down the road. Or stated another way, taking care of small instances of bad behavior sends a very positive message to the individual and the team at large, and is very effective in preventing bigger problems of bad behavior down the road. So giving management discussion points and tools for addressing rude behavior, disruptive behavior, bullying or teasing behavior in among their team members and those for whom they are responsible. Giving them tools for noticing issues with physical boundaries or personal boundaries, folks. And maybe there's a team member that has a tendency to pry into people's personal lives or make personal comments. Give your management folks tools to address dating or budding romantic relationships on the team, and who they should speak to about that and how they should address that, if at all. Talk with management about the consequences of unaddressed performance issues and attendance issues and tensions between team members. These kinds of things, every HR professional knows that these kinds of things left unchecked can lead to all sorts of productivity and efficiency issues down the road, and potential legal issues surrounding those. But they also can lead to behavioral problems that can manifest themselves in harassment and other behaviors down the road. In discussions I have been having with folks throughout the country at various conferences where we discuss these issues, a number of general counsel from different companies and a number of folks from different organizations of all sizes have talked to me about the various programs that they have instituted, and I found a number of them very, very interesting. One company, for instance, has a periodic, video, YouTube, very short messages from their CEO that goes out to everybody in the organization and talks about a particular part of the code of corporate conduct, a particular part of the mission, a particular part of the expectations. Folks tend to listen to senior management when they're, put front and center on their screen. Companies are talking about how they are dedicating a portion of regular management meetings to topics of concern in the company. One gave the example that they spent part of a management meeting giving short hypotheticals of difficult issues that might arise on their team, behavioral issues, productivity issues, etc., and obtain the folks' input and discussion regarding how to address those. The companies also talked about how they will have touch points where they talk about strategy in terms of effective evaluation and performance feedback. Others talked about how they focused on, as part of touch points in management meetings, how to deal with problem customers and how that is an important and difficult area, both from a business perspective but a legal perspective. How do you deal with this? Do you have to? Yes. And how do you go about doing this? Problem vendor personnel. Problem behavior at company-sponsored events, trade shows, and during business trips, things of that nature. So as you can see, really the message is a focus on leadership expectations and leadership coaching, and multiple touch points to do that, because behavior will change if there is an atmosphere, a culture created by multiple conversations and touch points with management about what is expected here, what is our culture, what should I be modeling to my team, how should I be dealing with difficult issues on my team. I mentioned that the strategy for the employees at large is different in a number of respects because, the management of your organization really holds the legal risk for you. The focus with the employees at large is primarily, not primarily, but an emphasis in the strategies for the employees at large is a focus on their own behavior and to encourage the reporting of concerns and to talk about the process that the company goes through by when a concern is brought to their attention, so that the employees have the message that we take your views seriously, we take your concerns seriously. We may not always agree on the outcome of those concerns, but we are here to listen and we encourage you to talk to us. This is something that is especially critical in this new environment, this Me Too environment. We also suggest with employees to have definitely the more concentrated training meetings periodically, but also to have, as I mentioned with the management, touch points in employee meetings to talk about a particular aspect of corporate culture, a particular requirement of the company, standards of the company. One of the larger companies whose HR VP I spoke with said that they actually involve the employees, the line employees and the staff employees, in developing part of that message. They do surveys and obtain, what are, some areas that you see that we should be focusing on, areas of improvement. And based on what the employees bring up, they involve employees in developing messages and posters and discussion points for meetings to talk about those things. The message with the employees, definitely to discuss in concrete terms what it means to act with respect and professionalism, and give concrete examples, not general statements of what is expected of people. You take specific examples from your own workplace and your own challenges in that workplace, and facilitate, to the extent you can, discussion and input from those team members and employees at large. And don't avoid the tough topics. Talk about rude behavior. Talk about disruptive behavior and examples of that are specific to your work environment, so that they have an understanding of what is expected. Talk about physical boundaries. Talk about personal boundaries. And very critical with respect to the employee base at large. Discuss specifically what they should do if they witness or they are subject to behavior or conduct that they feel is inappropriate, or they have a workplace concern. You want, particularly in this environment, you want employees to come to you and tell you what's going on. I know that in years past, oftentimes folks would share with me that after a discussion of sexual harassment or some other aspect of workplace behavior, the number of complaints and concerns rose, and that was somewhat burdensome. But better you should hear about it before it becomes a legal concern. And also, as I mentioned, the manner in which you address those concerns once they're brought to you, the manner in which you address those concerns goes a long way towards promoting the very the corporate culture you want to promote, of fairness, openness, or however you define that corporate culture. I mentioned that I have at the back of my materials some examples of some outcomes in settlements and litigation. But we do have a few minutes here, so I may go ahead and go through those. What are the implications of not doing something productive and proactive in this new environment? Business and personal relationships are in play here. We've seen it play out in the traditional media. We've seen it play out in the social media. And the impact on productivity, talent turnover, and in recruiting talent is evident. I am hearing anecdotally from clients that folks, the top talent, are asking questions about how the company handles matters of this nature. What kind of leadership do they promote? What are the mechanisms for addressing concerns? One of the statistics that I came across recently was from the Harvard Business Review that said a significant number of folks that have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace leave the workplace within 2 years. The impact on talent turnover is very real in these situations. And the impact on customer relationships. I'm hearing anecdotally from my client that customers want to hear about what companies are doing in this area. We expect to see more agency charges and lawsuits. We definitely are already seeing many more threatened lawsuits in this area, and ones that, as I mentioned, are pushing the envelope in terms of the legal thresholds for harassment. We're seeing a lot of threatened lawsuits involving what the person perceives as unfair or unreasonable behavior. And as I had mentioned, the negotiated settlements, that the settlements that are being demanded are quite a bit different than what we've seen in the past. Just to give you a notion of some, not to give everybody heartache or heart attack here, but just in some of the reported settlements in 2018 involving harassment of various kinds, you can see that they cross industries and they are quite significant. These are settlements, so if these cases went to trial and if they hadn't settled, you can pretty much predict that the outcome would have been a monetary award of a significantly higher nature. These are settlements that came out of the EEOC recently. So what are our takeaways from our morning session? Or our afternoon session, actually. The earth has moved, and it's not likely to go back to pre-fall of 2017 sensibilities. I thought that the media explosion would die down. That was my first thought when it first broke last fall, because I thought, well, this must be, limited to Hollywood, because God knows what happens in Hollywood. But it absolutely has continued, and we expect it to continue. Things play out in social media now. The public opinion has shifted, and employee awareness and sensitivity has shifted. So our message is to expect a change in attitudes and tolerance levels and plan for the change to the extent you're able to do so. Consider steps and programs that go beyond traditional harassment training to leadership development and an ongoing discussion with the employees at large. Devise ways to have ongoing discussions with management, supervisors, executives, to ensure that they understand that they are, whether or not they want to be, the face of the organization and role models, and that their behavior and approaches to leadership define the work environment for the team and the organization as a whole. I will see if there are any questions. This individual is asking, do you have webinars that assist in coaching leadership? That is a very excellent thought, and I will take that to my colleagues to consider putting together a program of that nature, because that is a very interesting thought, and we would certainly be interested in doing that. And there's a question about, are there talking points to assist in facilitating the development of the cultural expectation? Yes, indeed, we do have talking points for that. We are coming to the end of our session this afternoon, but we certainly can, you probably have my contact information somewhere in the webinar materials, and we're happy to have a further discussion with you on that topic. Thank you for your attention this afternoon. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you in our next webinar.